Do you think Luka can force a Game 7 of this series without KP?
No, I don't. I think the Clippers are tired of this talk of Luka Doncic. The Clippers have bigger fish to fry. I'm telling you, they're tired of hearing Luka in the news every day, and that's why you saw the performance from the Clippers last game. Playoff P is back. Kawhi is still doing his thing. Lou Will. I think he had his one shining moment in this series. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Luka. He's a top 5 player. He's great. But with no Porzingis, it's going to be tough to have him. So he's going to have any of these type of performances of 43. I don't think he comes close to that in the rest of this series. It's going to be normal, like the 22-8-4, because the Clippers are locked in. They only got to focus on him. If these other guys can beat you, go ahead. If Curry and Hardaway Jr. can beat me, then hats off to him.
Look, you're completely right. You notice how we're not talking about can the Dallas Mavericks force a Game 7.
No.
I know. We're talking about can Luka force a Game 7. And look, I think that, he's done an amazing job this series. But even in that Game 4 win, they were down 20. So the Clippers are looking as look, we've played better basketball. We let them come back in the game in Game 4. And then all of a sudden, Game 5, they showed what they were capable of doing. Paul George got going. Their defense got going. So I don't think they can. And if the Mavericks are able to force a Game 7, it's because Luka put up 43, 17, and 13 again.
I mean, look, first of all, the Mavericks weren't even slated to be in the playoffs. So the fact that he got them here, that he was able to put up just a strong showing in the early part of this series, that's commendable in and of itself, right, Paul, when you say you're not taking anything away from him? Obviously, he's already accomplished a tremendous amount. But the idea was to have him and KP together, right?
Yeah.
Mark Cuban said, this is my Steve Nash and Dirk Nowitzki for the next 10 years. Do you trust Kristaps Porzingis' health going forward?
No, I do not. I mean, I've seen this time and time again. Players who get hurt early in their career continue to have lingering issues with injuries throughout their career. Yeah, he'll have a year where he's healthy. He'll have a year where he's not healthy, but nothing consistent. I'm really concerned, especially for a big guy that size. It's going to be tough. 82 games, it's a marathon. We're not just talking about a short season. That's going to be tough on his body. It puts years on your career when you have injuries. So a fourth-year player having 2 surgeries is like almost going into your 10th year, and it puts miles on your body.
Yeah. No, look, and look, when we look at this team and we look at Luka, everyone that knows basketball can see MVPs and championships in his future if the Mavericks are able to build the team around him, because he's that good. But also, you need players that can be healthy because you have to play 100-plus games. You have to win 16 games after a long postseason in order to win a championship. And Porzingis, you want him to be healthy. We're rooting for him. He's a fan favorite, and he's one of the most talented players in this league. But that's a lot of basketball. That's a lot of physicality that you have to play and that are added on to the end of a season. And if Luka being healthy over the next 10 years, Porzingis gives you 4 or 5 good years, and there's going to be years where they won't be the best team, but they've got to build a championship team around him.
And that's why so many people are looking at the Mavericks, who will have a max slot available. Remember, Luka's still on a rookie contract, so that leaves room financially on their roster. If you could bring in another big name, Porzingis doesn't have to be necessarily your Robin every time. He might be talent-wise, but in terms of health, he could maybe be more of that third player to give you something. We will have to see what the Mavericks do. They need to get through today first, of course. On the Clippers side, Game 5 was also when Paul George broke out of his historic slump, scoring 35 points, 12 for 18 shooting from the floor, and a perfect 7 for 7 from the free throw line. After the game, PG spoke more about the mental health issues that he's been dealing with inside of the bubble.
If it got severe, I think my team would have understood if I needed to walk away from this. But, all it took was me seeking help and seeking advice. And starting from there, it helped. It put me in a different place. And, that's where the decision was made, that I can continue to keep going because of the help that I got.
Honestly, we've had Kevin Love obviously elevate this conversation, DeMar DeRozan. To have a player of Paul George's level in the middle of a playoff series talk about this, I think is so important and illuminating for people who hold up basketball players as sort of the ultimate machismo male example. Richard, I know you never had to deal with a bubble environment, but how difficult do you think it is for players to deal with the pressure of the postseason, being cut off from any physical contact with the world and family that they know and have?
Well, I think it's extremely difficult. All 3 of us have kids here, and everyone is talking about isolating the kids away from their classmates and the long-term impacts, even the short-term impacts that they're seeing, whether it's mood behaviors, like all of these changes in kids. And it's the same for adults. If you put these adults who were with their family, like isolated with their family for months, and now all of a sudden they're in the most competitive situation. There's a ton of stuff going in the world around them. There's a ton of pressure on them, and now they're isolated from their kids, their parents, their family. There's a lot of stuff. Gordon Hayward's, about to have a baby. Conley had a baby from the Utah Jazz. So it's like you see the world is still going on, and they're isolated. So that can have some issues, and especially if you're not playing well. Now all of a sudden the media attention, anytime you turn on the TV, they're like, "What's wrong with Paul George? What's wrong with Paul George? What happened to playoff P?" So now it just compounds it. So it becomes extremely difficult.
Extremely difficult. Let me tell you something about the playoffs. They're an emotional roller coaster. You play one game, you're on an ultimate high, you feel good, you're with the guys, you might be playing cards the next day, shoot around, you lose, you don't talk to nobody.
Nobody.
You go in the room, you go home, you go in your room, you sit there, especially me as a young player in the playoffs. But as I got older, we lose that playoff game, yeah, I'm in the dumps, but now I go home, I hug my daughter, I hug my wife. It takes me out of that place. Yeah. And now when you don't have that in this setting, it can put you emotionally in the dumps, and I can see that.
And by the way, I've heard some criticism from some former players, from talk show radios, all of that. If you have not been down there in that bubble, I don't want to hear it. I'm sorry, because I don't think anyone understands the environment, and this whole they're millionaires living in a hotel does not take into account the scope of what they are dealing with down there. Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.